My name is Brad Means with the Lective Formation team at St. Lawrence Martyr, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about pacing and energy and pausing. The most frequent complaint from about a lector is the lector reads too fast. You may have spent hours reading and studying this text, but it may have been 3 years since the people in the assembly have heard it. So look to the person in the back of the pew and read to her. That gives you a sense of the magnitude of what you're doing. Because reading too quickly, or even reading too slowly, can completely flatten out your text. Reading too quickly makes it sound like nothing's important. And reading too slowly can make it sound like everything is important. Now, a slower pace is very important. Changing the pace brings life into a reading. Here, let me try to show you. In this passage from Revelation. I, John, heard a voice from heaven say, "Write this, Blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on." "Yes," said the Spirit, "let them find rest from their labors, for their works accompany them." Now, in that passage, there were only 2 sentences. There were 3 speakers. It's very important to break out the pausing and the pacing to help the assembly make sense of the readings. Here, it's also important for sometimes to increase your pace. In this reading from the Gospel on Holy Thursday, interaction between Peter and Jesus, a little less profound than the previous reading, a little more energy is needed. Peter said to him, "You will never wash my feet." Jesus answered him, "Unless I wash you, you will have no inheritance with me." Simon Peter said to him, "Master, then not only my feet, but my hands and my head as well." Hopefully, you were able to see how the pacing influences that reading greatly. One of the very most important things in this pacing is when you're reading a list, you have to be sure not to get into a sing-song. The reading we're all familiar with from 1 Corinthians, love is patient. If you sing-song that, you really can take the punch out of it. Let me do this. I'm going to give you sort of a sing-songy version, and then something a little more measured. Love is patient, love is kind. It is not jealous, it is not pompous, it is not inflated, it is not rude. Contrasted to something like this. Love is patient, love is kind. It is not jealous, it is not pompous, it is not inflated, it is not rude. Hopefully there you're able to see the differences. The energy level really impacts the reading. And your energy level not only comes from the scripture. I mean, obviously, you're going to read something from wisdom different than a story from Acts. But your audience also impacts the energy in a reading. You're going to have a very different energy at a children's mass than you are at a funeral mass. Also the space. A very different energy in a large cathedral versus a small chapel. Obviously, very more intimate pace in the chapel. Now, pausing. Very important rule of thumb. When you put a pause before a sentence or a statement, you make that statement sound important. A longer pause builds even more importance to the statement. So make sure your pauses are measured and conscious. Now, when you're practicing, you can find the proper pausing quite often by using the punctuations. It's a good guideline. It's not guaranteed, especially in readings from St. Paul, where one sentence is 2 paragraphs. you got to be careful about the semicolons there. They're quite often pauses. But to bring the meaning out of those, you sometimes need to insert your own and run through his. Always, it's about the meaning and using the pausing as a tool. Your lectionary is also built with phrase lines, sense lines, as is your workbook. Those aren't always infallible either, though. You've got to be very careful about that. You can tell sometimes when a lector hasn't prepared enough, when they get up there and they pause at the end of a sense line when it doesn't make sense. Sometimes they wrap and run together, and sometimes you need to add a pause in the middle to make the meaning come out of that reading. Okay, before I end, I need to tell you about the two most important pauses. The one before the scripture, after a reading from, and the one after the scripture, before the word of the Lord. You need to take time and separate the introduction and the ending from the Holy Scripture. Even waiting as much as 3 seconds is fine. That needs to be separated. So that's it on pacing, energy, and pausing. Thanks for listening. I'll see you in church.